Story 1. The Tide Pool. This happened 2 summers ago when I rented a tiny, secluded cabin on the rugged coast of Maine. I wanted a week of absolute isolation to read and unplug, so I chose a spot where the nearest neighbor was miles away. The cabin sat on a low cliff overlooking a gray, rocky beach that completely disappeared twice a day when the massive Atlantic tide rolled in. On my 3rd evening there, around 8 p.m., the tide was at its lowest point, exposing an expansive stretch of slick black rocks and deep tide pools. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, leaving the beach in a heavy, purple twilight. I decided to walk down to the shore with a flashlight to look at the marine life trapped in the pools. The beach was completely silent, except for the distant, rhythmic rushing of the ocean a few hundred yards out. I was kneeling next to a particularly deep, dark tide pool, shining my light through the clear water at the sea anemones, when I noticed something unusual at the very bottom. Buried face down in the thick kelp was a smartphone. It was enclosed in a heavy-duty, waterproof plastic case. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached my arm deep into the freezing water, pulled it out, and wiped the algae off the plastic. To my absolute shock, the screen lit up. It still had 12% battery. There was no cell service out here, but I noticed the camera app was open, and there was a single unread notification from the phone's local notes app. I tapped it open. The note was dated from the previous night at 3 a.m. It read, "If you find this, look at the last video. It doesn't swim. It walks." A cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. I quickly opened the photo gallery and clicked on the most recent video file. The footage was shaky, shot in total darkness using a phone flashlight, right on this exact
rocky beach. In the video, a panicked voice was breathing heavily. The camera panned down into the very tide pool I was standing next to. As the flashlight beam hit the water, something pale and massive shifted beneath the kelp. It wasn't a fish or a seal. It had long, segmented human-like fingers that gripped the edges of the underwater rocks. Suddenly, the thing in the video began to rapidly climb out of the pool. The video cut to black amidst a horrific, wet, screeching sound. My hands began to shake so violently I almost dropped the phone. I instantly turned my flashlight toward the tide pool at my feet. The water was completely still. But then, a thick, dark clump of kelp parted. 2 large, milky white eyes, completely devoid of pupils, stared directly up at me from the bottom of the pool. Before I could even scream, a wet, pale hand with elongated knuckles slammed against the inside of the rocky ledge, gripping the stone. I bolted. I scrambled up the slick, jagged rocks, scraping my hands and knees in the dark, and didn't stop running until I was inside my cabin with the heavy wooden door deadbolted. I sat by the window with a hunting knife until sunrise. When the tide came back in at dawn, it swallowed the rocky beach entirely. The police searched the area later, but the ocean had washed everything clean.
The creepy part? When I checked the phone again before turning it over to the detectives, I realized the phone's owner hadn't been a tourist. The lock screen picture was a photo of the inside of my rented cabin, taken through the glass window while I was asleep on my first night there.
Story 2. The Bonfire.
This happened the summer after I graduated from high school in a sleepy coastal town in Oregon. A group of 5 of us decided to have a late-night bonfire on a section of the beach known as the Black Shingles, a completely isolated stretch of coastline flanked by massive, towering cliffs on one side and the freezing Pacific on the other. Because of the cliffs, there was only one narrow trail leading back up to the main road. Once you were down there at night, you were completely cut off. By 2 a.m., the fire had died down to a low, glowing bed of red embers. The wind had completely died, leaving the beach eerie and dead quiet, save for the low hiss of the waves. 2 of my friends were asleep in blankets, and the rest of us were just staring into the dim light, exhausted. That's when I noticed a strange silhouette about 50 yards away, standing right at the edge of the surf. Because it was pitch black outside the small radius of our dying fire, I could only see a faint shape. It looked like a person, completely still, just facing the ocean. I nudged my friend Chris and pointed. He frowned, assuming it was just a midnight beachcomber, and called out, "Hey, you all right out there?" The figure didn't move. It didn't turn around. We watched it for 3 agonizing minutes. Then, with a slow, jerky, mechanical motion, the person began to walk backward. They weren't walking toward us. They were walking backward into the crashing waves. Step by step, the ocean swallowed their ankles, then their waist, and their chest. Chris and I panicked. We grabbed our flashlights, jumped up, and ran toward the surf, shouting that someone was drowning. We threw the bright beams of our flashlights across the dark water, scanning the waves where the person had just disappeared. The water was empty. There was no splashing, no struggling. Then, Chris gasped and dropped his flashlight into the wet sand. He pointed his trembling finger not out at the ocean, but directly down at the shoreline. Illuminated by my flashlight were footsteps in the wet sand. But they didn't lead from the cliffs down to the water. The deep, heavy footprints emerged out of the deep ocean, walked straight up the beach, and stopped exactly where the figure had been standing. They were facing our bonfire the entire time. The figure hadn't been walking backward into the ocean to drown. It had been walking backward into the water to hide, after standing in the dark watching us sleep. We ran back to the fire, violently woke up our friends, and scrambled up the steep cliff trail in total hysterics. The creepy part? When the police investigated the beach the next morning, they found no signs of a struggle. But they did find 5 distinct, wet handprints pressed onto the back of our parked cars up on the cliff road, as if someone had stood behind each vehicle in the dark, watching us pack up and leave all their dreams.
Story 3. The Driftwood Castle. This happened last summer when I was working as a seasonal night shift security guard for a luxury beachfront resort in modern-day Florida. My job was incredibly monotonous. From 11 p.m. to 6 p.m., I had to walk the private white sand beach belonging to the hotel, making sure teenagers weren't breaking into the cabanas or lighting illegal fires. It was around 3:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the beach was completely deserted. The moon was bright, casting a pale silver glow over the sand. As I walked past the edge of the resort's property line, where the beach turned into a state park reserve, I noticed a massive structure about 100 yards ahead. Someone had built a towering, intricate fortress out of heavy ocean driftwood. It was impressive, nearly 8 feet tall, with thick walls of tangled gray branches woven tightly together. It had a single narrow opening at the front that served as a crawl space door.
Assuming it was just a project built by local kids during the day, I walked up to it to make sure no one was hiding inside. I clicked on my heavy maglite flashlight and shone the beam through the narrow opening into the hollow center of the Driftwood Castle. The interior was empty, but my stomach instantly dropped when the light hit the back wall. Pinned to the tangled branches with rusty nails were dozens of Polaroid photographs. I stepped closer, ducking my head inside the damp, wood-scented structure to get a better look. Every single photograph was of a resort guest. They were shot from a distance, taken while the guests were sunbathing, swimming, or walking the beach during the day. Red marker X's were drawn over some of their faces. But what made my blood run completely cold was the very last photo in the row. It was a picture of me, taken from behind, walking this exact stretch of beach. The photo was completely fresh. The chemical sheen on the paper hadn't even fully dried yet.
Suddenly, the heavy scent of salt and decaying seaweed inside the structure was replaced by a sharp, pungent smell of human sweat. I slowly turned my flashlight upward. Wedged horizontally into the ceiling of the Driftwood Castle, just inches above my head, was a man. He was completely naked, his skin smeared with black, wet sand, clinging to the heavy branches like a spider. He was staring down at me with wide, unblinking eyes, holding a jagged piece of broken green glass in his teeth. I let out a throat-tearing scream, dropped my flashlight, and threw myself backward out of the narrow opening, scrambling onto the sand. I drew my baton and pointed it at the structure, coughing through the dust. The Driftwood Castle remained dead silent for 3 seconds. Then the entire structure violently erupted outward as the man burst through the roof, scattering heavy branches into the sand. He didn't run toward me. He sprinted with terrifying, animalistic speed down the beach and lunged directly into the dark, crashing waves of the ocean, disappearing instantly beneath the black surf.
The police and Coast Guard searched the waters for days, but no body was ever recovered. The creepy part? When the resort management reviewed the high-definition security footage from the hotel's roof, they realized the man hadn't just built that structure recently. He had been living underneath the floorboards of the resort's main beachside towel hut for 3 months, watching every single person who stepped onto the sand.